Welcome to week 6. My name is James J. and I'm going to start us off this week with a poem by Charles Simic. It's called Stone. Stone. Go inside a stone. That would be my way. Let somebody else become a dove or gnash with a tiger's tooth. I am happy to be a stone. From the outside, the stone is a riddle. No one knows how to answer it. Yet within, it must be cool and quiet, even though a cow steps on it full weight, even though a child throws it in the river. The stone sinks, slow, unperturbed, to the river bottom where the fishes come to knock on it and listen. I have seen sparks fly out when two stones are rubbed, so perhaps it is not dark inside after all. Perhaps there is a moon shining from somewhere as though behind a hill. Just enough light to make out the strange writings, the star charts on the inner walls. It's Charles Simic. I absolutely love that poem and how he takes something as simple as a stone and speculates as to what might be inside of it, and spends in that short little piece a good amount of time just considering something as basic as a stone. So I figured I'd start Simic out this week. We're going to be in a transition right now. We're moving from our short flash fiction into our creative nonfiction section. So we will still take all the skills that we've been working on, building on in the previous 5 or so weeks of this class. As far as you'll still bring your skills and what we've learned so far in regards to coming up with interesting, engaging titles, and coming up with interesting openers and engaging openers that draw the reader in those first few sentences. Still be concentrating on writing with detail, right? The idea of showing the particulars as opposed to telling or summarizing what's going on. So we'll still keep doing that. We'll also be working on the same idea of closing powerfully, perhaps with an image. We'll want to be engaging in a lot, getting a lot done in a small amount of space. So what we've been working on so far will transfer right over to this idea of working with creative nonfiction, and hopefully it'll make for a nice smooth transition. And what we'll do this week is I'll end up talking a little bit about the next writing assignment and how that's going to move us towards that notion of creative nonfiction. What is that exactly? And we'll just we'll proceed from there, see what happens. So what I've done in this week's module is it's going to look like there are a lot of things, but there are a lot of short things that are in there. Either just from whether it be pages, these would normally be handouts if we were working in class format that I would be given to you, or whether they just be short, smaller comments that I make on different assignments. So it's going to look like a whole lot, but I'm trying to make, hopefully the total time this week won't be any greater than normal by any significant amount, and I'll have them broken down into a little more digestible parts. So what I'll do for this week's reading assignment is I'm going to take a piece from Rose Meadow Press, but they also do a nonfiction field guide, similar sort of style as what we've been up to with our short fiction, our flash fiction field guide. And what I've done, since I don't end up using all that much of this particular book, I'll end up just taking some images and posting those for the chapters for you, so you didn't have to end up buying a whole nother book if we were just going to use a couple little chapters. So that's what I think I'll do for this week. And if you want, you can kind of hit pause right here, and you can pull up the nonfiction reading assignment if you want to look at that in the module, or I'm just going to read a couple paragraphs from that. So you can also kind of take that, as far as my commentary with this reading, and then potentially read it in more detail on your own. So, let's proceed like that. This is Sue Silverman ended up writing this essay, and it's called "Writing Through Innocence and Experience: Voices in Flash Nonfiction." Okay, so in Flash Nonfiction, and what Sue Silverman is up to here is she's using the idea of writing through innocence and experience, the Song of Innocence and Experience. She's making reference to William Blake, who was a great English poet from the early 1800s, and he had written a whole series. Actually, he's written a tremendous series where he was taking his own personal religious beliefs and incorporating them with his vision as an artist, and also as a poet, as a writer, and also the time that he was writing, and was there was just absolutely awful conditions, especially for children, and even the sort of concept of what we think about there in terms of child labor laws, anything like that did not exist remotely. So he'd come up with a system of, when looking at this tough, terrible world in London in the early 1800s, he was coming up with this idea of once someone, that we're born in this innocent state, and then once the world has, for better and oftentimes worse in that in the environments that he was seeing, has affected us, can we go back to that earlier stage, and what does that look like, and how do we reflect on those things? So he was using that duality in his writing, and Silverman in her essay uses that sort of notion of back and forth as far as observing what happens, and then when we have a little more experience, a little more maturity, when we start thinking about what happened and reflecting on it and how that's different. Okay, so that's the reference that she makes, and she passes through kind of quickly here. So I wanted to make sure to cover that. If you may spend quite a bit of time either in high school covering William Blake. He's oftentimes taught at the same time when you study the Romantic poets, the Romantic English poets like Shelley and Keats and that sort of thing. So he predates those guys by about a generation, but a lot of ways sets up those writers. But if you hadn't heard of Blake before, he's definitely also a person to look into in more detail. I absolutely love his poetry, and so that's the reference here, the setup here. But the idea is that Silverman's using here is as a writer. So when you're writing your nonfiction, it's not simply a matter of nonfiction, it's something true. So instead of telling flash fiction stories that don't need to be true as far as they're false, but hopefully emotionally true, but the events are false, right, in fiction, and anything can happen. What do you do in creative nonfiction when you're trying to stick to really what has happened? And so what Silverman gets after, what becomes very important in that sort of writing, is the narrator. So that first person, the I, becomes very important. And what does that mean exactly? What does the I mean when you're sitting down to write in creative nonfiction? Now there's this notion of, well, it's me, right? But of course it is and it isn't, right? We put on a little bit of a facade anytime we decide that we're going to remember an event, or we all have seen an event. We all see it a bit differently, right? We all have our unique perspectives. There are certain things that are forgotten. There are certain things that we do remember. There's that part, and then there's also, as writers, we select what we want to include. So that act itself is also part of how we're forming the reality of that creative nonfiction piece. So there's a lot going on there. It seems straightforward as far as I'm me, and that's who I am. And so this is when I type I on the page, I went to the store. Okay, well that's fairly straightforward, but when we start looking at things like the past, our personal responses to things, it gets complicated fairly quickly. So I'm going to read a little bit from Silverman's essay and see what you think so far. She says, "The I in creative nonfiction is a literary device." All right, so it's a tool just like the rest of our tools. It's just like the idea of closing with an image and leaving that powerful resonance with our reader. All right, so it's a device, right? So the I in creative nonfiction is a literary device used to enhance and explore complicated truths. Just as we are complex people in life, we must be equally complex personas on the page. One way to accomplish this exploration of self is through the use of voice. Okay, so we've heard the term voice. It's one of those literary devices we hear. I can read something and say, I really like the voice, I like the way it sounds. There's something about that that's appealing. So the term voice can become very general, but the way that I think that Silverman's getting after voice is a key tool for you to use as a nonfiction writer in focusing how your reader perceives the events that you're describing. But we're not using one's everyday voice, In real life, for example, I don't speak or write emails using carefully crafted language. When talking to friends, I'm not particularly mindful about word choice. I don't use sensory imagery or think metaphorically. You can imagine, as far as that person trying to talk to that person would be fairly awful, right? That's not the way that we don't talk, the way that we write in terms of that crafting. Now, we do talk to some extent the way that we write because we still have our voice. So I think that this is one of the things that's key, and that Silverman goes into more detail, but I want to bring up and clarify this area. So if we're thinking about the nonfiction I, or the first person, all right, so when I use I in a creative nonfiction piece, I think it becomes interesting in that we have our day-to-day voice and the way that we speak, right? And that wouldn't be exactly the way that we write, in that, like she says, we go off on tangents, we bounce all around, and it would be difficult to read an essay like that. And at the same time, if we put on this sort of imagined fake voice or persona in our creative nonfiction, where we sort of imagine ourselves as some sort of Victorian age, highfalutin, really polished sort of voice to write our essays in, that also becomes artificial pretty quickly, right? It's not us. So there's somewhere between the well-crafted I, their first person, and the just casual day-to-day voice, that we have to sort of find our range, and where is it that we're going to focus. It's not going to be all the way on one side or all the way on the other side, right? We're going to need to find that so that we don't seem fake, like we're putting on a mask, a facade, and trying to write from that perspective, because I think that becomes quickly tiresome and probably not it wouldn't be interesting, I don't think, to the reader, nor to ourselves, I think, as writers. But then again, it has to be a little more formal than our regular voice that we just speak and talk with. So that's one of the selections that you'll be making, and it seems straightforward. I think it's actually difficult. I think it's something that you'll naturally find a certain voice in the way that you end up writing on the page, but you'll want to fiddle with that a little bit, right? You want to polish how much is too polished and to the point of feeling artificial, how much is too loose to just using up a lot of space. So does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. This is one of the ones where I really do wish, if we were in the classroom, I could see expressions and faces, and see if I should go on with more examples, or if you're nodding saying, yeah, we get that. That's obvious. So I don't know, hard to say, but hopefully there'll be, when you're reading through this essay, it'll make a little more sense. But I wanted to concentrate on that because this is essential to what we'll be up to really for the next 2 formal writing assignments and beyond. Actually, this will translate into the 3rd section on poetry as well, rather nicely. So she makes reference to her short story Archipelago. So she says, using my flash nonfiction piece Archipelago as an example, let's say that in the time of the actual event, the years before I wrote the essay, I confided in my sister as to why I didn't want to leave the West Indies. So she's 13 years old. She's from America. Has spent most of her life, though, in the West Indies, and is returning back to New York. And so that's the sort of summation of that story. I would probably have said something like, I hate leaving. I don't want to live where it's cold. This brief explanation, while sincere, provides a little insight or depth. Okay, so that's sort of the way that we would talk, especially if we were 13 years old and not wanting to go someplace. So that's the way we would talk, but we're looking for a little bit more there. Likewise, a diary voice, right, can be intimate, but it doesn't shape life into art either. Here's a diary entry I could have written the night before leaving the island. Quote, I'm going to miss everything about St. Thomas. I hate even the thought of returning to the States where it's so cold and gray. These sentences are heartfelt but abstract, lacking sensory imagery, which we talked about, right, those details. They don't bring the reader inside the experience. Neither of these voices, though, are authentically me. They would work when writing flash. Neither of these voices would work when writing flash nonfiction. So just the simplicity wouldn't quite pull it off. So Silverman, with her story, she ends up polishing a bit more and being a little more refined than either one of those voices. So this is where she mentions William Blake, and I'll get to that. She says, so who then narrates an essay? It's both me and not me. And I think this is an interesting idea to get at. So when you're writing a creative nonfiction essay, who narrates? Who's the I in this? It's both you and not you at the same time. It's a little bit of a construction, but we don't want to make it overly fabricated. It's both me and not me. It's an artistically created me comprised of two different voices that work in conjunction with each other. And then the way that she sets this up, the voice of innocence and the voice of experience, labels loosely borrowed from poet William Blake. Briefly, the voice of innocence describes the event. The voice of experience interprets and reflects on it. So there'll be passages in your creative nonfiction where you're just describing an event. You're just describing what happens. Then there'll be your interpretations of what happened. Okay, so then there'll be that reflection. There'll be the language choices you make when you're polishing that help shape the idea for the reader, whether they know, so that they know that this experience, whether it was emotionally jarring or whether it was ecstatic and a joyful experience, whatever it might be, your word choice and all the sort of crafting and polishing you do as a writer will start shaping that. So she gets in those two areas. Definitely take your time with these essays, or with this essay. I think it's about 6 pages that I'll be copying for you, but it's worthwhile. I plan on reading it twice. It's gonna shape the writing that we do, at least for the middle third of this class, and hopefully will be pretty useful for quite some time, because there's that certain idea that we have us, or who we feel we are, but we always have to do a certain amount of posturing and whatnot in order to communicate, both verbally and in conversation, and then also in our writing. And we don't want to feel inauthentic. But at the same time, we want to be able to take advantage of some of the things that we can do with the written language and polish and focus and shape our interaction with the reader. So that's I'll have those essays for you, or that essay for you in those pages available. And I think that'll be a real good one. I hope that that's a fun one for you. I'm going to mention too, just because we did get into William Blake a little bit, that I just wanted to show you sort of the cover of kind of get an idea of what this is from the Poetry and Prose of William Blake, one of these giant sort of selections. And I think that he's just an absolute blast. And it's kind of just to give you a feel for sort of the idea of some of the things that he wrote. He also, as I mentioned, he would end up writing about just all us, some things that were ignored and that were largely disregarded, especially in that early 19th century English society. And so I'll just kind of give a little quick example where he has this one called "The Fly." Little fly, thy summer's play my thoughtless hand has brushed away. Am not I a fly like thee, or art thou not a man like me? For I dance and drink and sing till some blind hand shall brush my wing. So if we think of that innocence and experience, what's happened, right? It's just the flies landed on him. And then that little description, little fly, thy summer's play, my thoughtless hand has brushed away. So that's just, it's eloquent in that style of writing back then. But flies landed on him. That's the event, and then there's the reflection. Am not I a fly like thee, a man like me? For I dance and drink and sing till some blind hand shall brush my wing. And so throughout that, he has this sort of idea of describing what has happened and then the reflection upon that. So that's what we'll be doing. We'll be responding to, and also I'll have a separate lecture on this quite a bit. Is for the third writing assignment, we'll be responding to a play. We'll be responding to "Waiting for Godot" by Samuel Beckett, a great Irish writer who spent a lot of his life in Paris. He ended up writing that originally. It's written a little bit after World War II. It was originally written in French. He wrote both French and English, and then translated after a few years into English, and has gone on to be described by many literary critics as one of the most important plays written in the 20th century in English. So I figured if it's not like with the pandemic going on that we can just head on down to the local theater and catch something, although that's certainly fun. I would encourage folks to do that when it's safe to do so. So I got to thinking, what can we do all together as a class? I thought, well, we may as well get a chance to see the most important play written in the 20th century in English, at least as some say. Hopefully, you'll get that impression, or at least it'll be enjoyable to you. So and I'll have a little YouTube link up for that. I managed to find there's all sorts of things on YouTube, and I managed to find one complete performance of the play that's, I think, pretty darn good. And the style that this play is that it's what they call existential, or the theater of the absurd, and so that it's very sparse. And as far as with this book, as far as the stage directions are fairly simple, in that there's a tree, kind of usually not a tremendously leafy green tree, but dead dying tree that's very sparse, and I think maybe like a stone, maybe kind of like something big stone around. Just made me think of Charles Simic that I started out today with, and then there's just a handful of characters, and so there's a lot of dialogue. The stage is deliberately bare and sparse, so that the idea, I think, is for the viewer, for the audience member, to fill in the rest of it, to engage and see what's going on the stage as reflection, which will hopefully fit very well into our third writing assignment. That's the plan anyway. This is not in any of these productions, as much as I say there are all sorts of versions on YouTube. I'll direct you towards the particular one I want to use for our class. But none of them you'll find any sort of high tech type of CG kind of events. There's no point for all that. It's deliberately sparse and bare. This is not a Marvel Comics movie type of thing, and and I think that in some ways it's with as much as there is this tremendous technology now and special effects that can go on with the way that we watch a film. This is this works, I think, to be in the opposite of that. So and hopefully be pretty interesting. What we'll be doing for that third paper is we'll write this. We'll view this play, and then give you a little chance to think about it, reflect on it a little bit, and then we'll do, for the third assignment, you'll be writing a creative nonfiction piece in response to the play. It can be, in terms of thinking about range of scopes, it seems to be the theme for this lecture. It can be something as close to reviewing the performance, so spending your 500 words reviewing what's happened and kind of sticking to that Song of Innocence type of idea and describing what you're seeing, or it can be quickly jumping away from that, and you can also reflect quite a bit on what you see and how that affects you personally, as far as thoughts, feelings, memories, other things that come into your mind as you're experiencing this play. So it's going to be a tool by which to process it. Your writing will be a tool by which to process and think about this play. So there's going to be that scope, and that's going to be up to you as the writer, and what's hopefully interesting, useful, and makes it an enjoyable experience for you. So that's what we'll be looking at. I think it'll be odd, and I'm kind of talking around it a little bit, because I suppose I do have a couple of concerns as far as with it being we're not going to be able to see it live. We're going to have to be looking at it separately on our own screens. So that can be a little bit challenging, a little difficult, as opposed to when you're in the play, when you're in the playhouse. It's an entirely different experience, because you also have that energy of those that are all around you. So we'll see. We'll find out how that goes. But I'll talk more about Beckett and about that play, or writing assignment 3, all those type of things in the rest of the module and some of those upcoming assignments. So let me check some of my other housekeeping notes, if there's anything else I want to mention. The writing assignments 2, I'm about halfway through those at the point that this is being broadcast. They're looking good. This is a tough thing to do in this format. As I mentioned, we're not actually going to a museum. We're not actually going to a play, and we're having to make some of those decisions. What are we going to focus on for ourselves, and do that individually before we collectively be doing that? So now you have to sort of take that leap and make that push on your own. So I very much appreciate that. I know that that's tough. And the second papers are looking solid overall, looking very good. In fact, I'm really proud of the efforts. They're very good. So I'll keep commenting on those, and I'll keep adapting as far as some sort of mini lectures and craft lectures based on any sort of patterns or themes I see. And hopefully you're having fun and you're enjoying these things. The idea is whether we're engaging with short stories in the first assignment, or responding to a visual art in the second assignment, or whether we're responding to a theater play in this third one. The idea is that there are these that hopefully you as writers can engage in other art forms, and as far as ways of processing those things, you'll be doing through your writing. And I want you to feel like, if whether that, not just for this class, but down the road, 6 months, a year, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, if you're in a new town, new place, and you see that you're walking down the street and you see, there's a play showing over here, that looks interesting, I should go. That would be something I should go to, especially if you don't know a whole lot about it. Or if you're walking by and you see that museum over there looks of interest, I got a little time, that's something I should check out. So that's hopefully what we're looking at. That would be my long-term plans, sort of beyond our grade book and all that kind of stuff. So I mentioned that, and I'm going to wrap this up and get the rest of the module posted. And wonderful start. Keep going. If you're getting stuck in any sort of way on any of these writing assignments or have a question, shoot me an email, and we'll see if we can get you unstuck. Okay. Enjoy.